Wherever two or three are gathered together, there is a virus among them. On our vacation, my wife and I shared a condo for 3 days with my seminary buddy, John, and his wife. John believes that Christians should share things, so he shared his cold with me. Last week, I could barely talk. On the other hand, he also shared a really good story with me, so I guess I have to be grateful. In March of 2011, a tsunami, we used to call it a tidal wave, hit Japan. And this story comes from an island in Matsushima Bay, and it was reported in the Los Angeles Times. An engineer was doing some research on the disaster to study how people recover from natural disasters, and he spoke with one of the survivors on that island, a man who was a community leader in one of the villages. Now, this village leader said that he and his neighbors knew what to do because of a story. The story was 1,000 years old, but this old story saved their lives. Story goes that a millennium ago, there was an earthquake and it caused a tsunami. So the villagers ran to a nearby hill, but they'd walked into a death trap. The quake created a second wave, and it hit that hill from the other direction just as the first wave hit. All the villagers who had taken refuge on that hill were killed. Now, the survivors from the other parts of the island put up a shrine on that hill, partly to show their grief and partly to warn future generations. And then they told the story to each new generation about why that shrine was there. Well, this engineer was doing this research and did some digging and found out that yes, indeed, there was an earthquake about 1,000 years ago in that area. Most likely it was the year 869, according to some records he was able to discover. And then some 50 generations later, March 11th, 2011, the tsunami warning tower on that island was silent. Why? The earthquake had knocked it out. So without the modern scientific warning system, the villagers relied on the story. Instead of taking refuge on that closer hill, the one with a shrine on it, they took the time to flee farther and get on a higher hill, farther away. And from their safe location, they saw two waves collide, just as it had done 1,000 years before. Tragically, not everybody made the right choice that day. There were a few people that went to the smaller shrine hill, and one person at least died on that hill in 2011. This is what the engineer wrote. I know that science and engineering save lives, but this time they did not help. A message sent into the future 1,000 years ago did. Reaching out from the distant past, long ago ancestors with their deeply embedded story saved their children. They were saved by their story. Now think how much attention we pay to stories, movies, TV shows, the news, jokes, novels, the anecdotes we tell each other from our everyday lives. We can't get enough. An observer of human behavior once wrote this: life is a matter of telling ourselves stories about life, and of savoring stories about life told by others, and of living our lives according to such stories, and of creating ever new and more complex stories about stories. And all this story making is not just about human life, it is human life. I love how Sunday by Sunday we stand up and hear a story from the Gospels. Our story's 2,000 years old, and the story's been cherished and passed down to us. And it's the story that saves us. Stories are interesting. Stories are easier to understand. A lot of us have a hard time when it comes to philosophical, abstract language. I'm sure if I was to try to explain to Andrew right now the difference between the substitutionary atonement and the example theory of Christ's death on a cross, he probably would tune me out. But we all love stories, and we all listen to stories. And the mystery of story is that you and I, all of us, we are a story, and we have stories to share. And the center of our religious tradition, according to storyteller and theologian John Shea, the center of our tradition is a man of 1,000 stories. And we have the stories Jesus told, and the stories people told about Jesus. They're written down in our Gospels. And faith in Jesus means retelling these stories in our community so that our lives can get entwined in the tale. We come to the Jesus story with our own problems, our own struggles, right there in our hearts, and we look for words and we look for actions that are going to speak to them. We become part of the story. Sometimes we're actually the Jesus in the story. His hands, His heart, His words. Other times we are the disciples, getting it right some of the times. Lots more times not getting it right. And sometimes, regrettably, we are those who oppose the Jesus way. The people who rejected Him. The people who betrayed Him. But no matter what, it is our story and we're all part of it. The story is written down in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, but those pages just can't hold that story in a box. Now back in May, we had a confirmation service, a Binghamton District confirmation service in Endicott at St. Paul's, and we of St. Mark's presented 4 great young people for confirmation. And that reminded me of something I had read. There was this young woman who's that's right, you were one of them. There was this young woman whose dad was a minister, and she was getting ready to be confirmed. And she was a little worried about whether or not she would always be able to believe everything she'd been taught about Christian doctrine. And her father must be a wise pastor, because he said this: "What you are promising is not that you will believe this forever. What you are promising is that this is the story you will wrestle with forever." And I really like that. The 1,000-year-old story of the tsunami saved the Japanese islanders whose story it was. Our 2,000-year-old story saves us and inspires us and comforts us and teaches us and centers us. It is the story I will wrestle with forever, and I am very glad, week by week, to share that story with you in our community. Amen.